Austin Andrews, and today we're going to go through a tutorial on how to set up FreeNAS. We're going to cover how to actually set up your computer for the FreeNAS operating system, how to install FreeNAS, and then finally how to configure FreeNAS using the Web Gui interface that the OS offers. So let's go and get started, and we'll start by covering a couple of things we'll need in order to configure a computer first. So obviously, the first thing we're going to need is a computer. It does have to be a computer that supports a 64-bit architecture and CPU, and it has to have an onboard networking port. So those are the two main things we'll need for our computer. Additionally, we'll need at least one hard drive to install on the computer. This will be used in FreeNAS's data pools, and we'll come to that later. And then we're going to need two USB drives. We'll need one to actually create a FreeNAS installer, and then the other will actually be used to install FreeNAS operating system on, and that'll stay inserted in the computer. And lastly, we'll always need a Phillips head screwdriver, just anytime we're working with hard drives and inserting those in a computer, it's always handy. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with installing that hard drive. So on our Lenovo laptop here, we're going to take the current hard drive out just because we don't want to lose any data on it. So this is a real easy removal. We'll just use our Phillips screwdriver here to unscrew that screw that's next to the pin port. And once that's taken off, there's a little pull tab. You just pull on that tab there, and that's going to bring the hard drive out. So that's the currently installed 2.5-inch laptop drive. Be sure to remember when you're taking this out to use care as to not damage the drive. Additionally, you want to set this drive aside just because we, one, don't want to lose any data on it, and two, we may want to put this back in the laptop. Once we're done with that though, we're going to install our new hard drive. So you can see there, and something to be sure of is to line up the SATA ports. So you can see the SATA ports on the top of the drive. That's what actually connects it to the computer. So it's hard to see inside the actual laptop there. And you can see off camera, I'm kind of looking into it. What we're doing is we just want to make sure the teeth line up, because if we was to put it in wrong, it could actually damage the drive or break the teeth. And so just do a little test fit, and it looks like it'll work. All right, so let's go ahead and actually set up FreeNAS on our USB stick. So this is on another workstation. This is a Windows 10 computer here. So we've already downloaded FreeNAS. So that's the actual image there. We're going to use an app called Win32 Disk Imager to create our FreeNAS installation disk. So once we launch Win32 Disk Imager there, we'll locate our FreeNAS ISO, and be sure you may have to change it to recognize ISO files. And we'll click Open, and then we're going to select the current USB stick that's inserted in our computer. So we only have one, so it's going to recognize as D. And we're just going to click Write, and it'll give us a warning that it could corrupt the device or it could erase all the contents on the USB stick. Go ahead and click Yes to proceed, just because we're expecting to overwrite that drive anyway. I've sped this up just for timeliness. This part can usually take anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes just based off the USB stick you're using. Additionally, based off the computer and the speeds of the ports on the computer, it could take longer, it could take less. But we've successfully created it, so we'll just click OK, and now we're going to install it. So there's our USB stick. That's the one we're going to use to hold our FreeNAS OS, so we'll call that the OS drive. So we'll install that first. And then that's our actual USB stick that we just created our FreeNAS installer on. So we'll install that next into the computer. And keep in mind the USB stick that you use for the FreeNAS installer, once you install FreeNAS, you can do anything else with that. You can overwrite it again and use it as a normal USB stick. And FreeNAS, the computer does have to be plugged into your network via Ethernet. So we'll make sure that's been plugged in, and that has to stay connected during the entire setup. And we're going to go and boot, and right now what you don't see is I'm actually holding down the BIOS key. And the BIOS key, typically it's F1, some computers have a dedicated BIOS key, but we just want to do that, so we get the option there, F12, to choose temporary startup device, because we're wanting to actually boot from that USB installer that we have FreeNAS set up on. So we're going to go to USB HDD there. And this is the hard part. You really want to have an idea of which USB key is which one. The one that has the installation file on it is that one there that I just chose. So sometimes it may help to even use a USB key, two different manufacturers. So we're going to choose the first option, FreeNAS installer, because that's going to allow us to just boot to the installer we created. And this can take a moment. And once we're booted into that, we'll actually install FreeNAS on the other USB drive. And that USB drive is going to stay plugged into this computer the entire time. That's what FreeNAS is actually running off of. It only takes about 8 gigs. So we'll choose install upgrade, and then you're just using the enter key. And now we're going to be sure to choose the correct drive. So we see one is our Samsung SSD. That's the actual drive we installed. That's going to hold all our files. The other one, the SanDisk U3 Cruiser Micro, is the USB drive. It's a 16 gig drive. That's what we're going to install FreeNAS on. And it's going to warn you when you select your disk, you're going to lose all the data on it. That's typical. Once you do that, you do have to create a password for your root account. Your root account is kind of like this supreme admin for FreeNAS. I'm just choosing a simple password here that's easy for me to remember. And then you're going to choose how you want to boot it. Booting with BIOS or UEFI. Newer computers typically all support UEFI. If it's an older computer and you're unsure, just boot via BIOS. And here we go. So we're actually starting the installation process for FreeNAS. Once again, I've sped this up for timeliness just because this part can take anywhere from 30 minutes to a few hours, really based off the hardware you're using as well as the USB drives you're using. So that part really took me about 30 minutes. So now we're rebooting, and this part also took about right around an hour to complete entirely because FreeNAS is now installing all the plugins, all the middleware, all the applications that it comes with. And this part just takes a while, and it's just kind of like watching paint dry. You can kind of see my reflection in there. I'm just kind of, sitting arms crossed, waiting for it to finish. A couple things we'll touch on while we wait on this. Once again, the computer you need is going to have to be a computer that supports 64-bit architecture. You'll need at least one hard drive in the computer to store your data on. You can use multiples, though, if you have a bigger computer that has more support for more hard drives. And additionally, you'll need at least 2 USB sticks. One's going to be the hard drive that FreeNAS ends up being installed on, because you don't want to waste a much larger hard drive for FreeNAS. And then the other one's just going to be your installer, and that's just going to be a temporary, disk. You'll plug that in, install it like we did here, and then unplug it. And once you're done with that, you can do whatever you like with it. So as you see here, the installation is actually done. And you'll get this message, after any FreeNAS install. It's just giving you some console setup options, if you want to reboot or shut down the computer. The big thing to take note of here, it says the web user interface is at, and this is your FreeNAS IP address. You need to write this down and remember this, that HTTP:/ or HTTPS:/ for secure HTTP, and then the IP address 192.168.1.56. That IP address is always going to be different depending on your network you're setting this up on. Every network is different, but you're going to use that IP address in the next step to log into the GUI. So be sure, write that down. And the other thing to really make sure you remember is that admin password you set up for the root account. So we're back at our workstation, and we're going to go and get started with setting up our FreeNAS server using the Web Gui. So this just has to be from any workstation on the same network as FreeNAS. And we'll go ahead and open up our web browser. Just chose Firefox here. Then we'll enter that IP address from the previous step. So HTTPS:// and then the IP address. Like I said, this could be different on every network. Ours was 192.168.1.56. We'll go ahead and enter that, and we'll proceed on to hit enter. Then we should get a splash screen just like we did there, the FreeNAS Shark. Then we're going to log in with that root account. And this was that password I was really harping on in the previous step that you really need to remember, because if you forget this, you'll actually have to redo the installation all over again. There's no undoing that if you was to forget that password. So we're going to log in with the account. Once again, it's called root, ROOT, and the password recreated in the installation steps. So we'll go ahead and log in here. Click login. If you're prompted to save the password, that's up to you. I'm going to hit dismiss that. We're welcome to the FreeNAS dashboard. So this is kind of what the FreeNAS Web GUI looks like upon startup. We can see on the left-hand side there, we have a lot of our tools and features that we'll get into in a little bit. The dashboard, though, gives an overview of the system, gives some basic information. We see our platform's generic here. The reason we're seeing that is because we didn't actually buy a server from the FreeNAS's parent company, IX Systems. We do see the version of FreeNAS we're on, so we're on version 11.3.U5, so that's the current release. We have a bit more information about our server. We have the CPU. We see that we're idling. We're not really doing much right now because we just set it up. We haven't set up any tasks or any disks. And then also we see memory over on the far right FreeNAS does require at least 8 gigabytes of RAM to operate. Without that, you're really going to underperform, or it may not boot at all. Really 7.8 gigabytes because of binary calculations. We see 5.5 is free, 1 gig is going to the ZFS cache, and then 1.3 gigs is actually running the FreeNAS server. That's what the services are you see there. We can also see our network interface down at the bottom. So we do see we're plugged in via Ethernet, it's 1000 base T, standard Ethernet cable. We see our IP address. But we'll go and get started. We're going to go over to the left-hand side, and we're going to set up what we call a pool. This is located under storage. So we're going to click on storage there. We'll click on pools. And a pool is basically just a configuration of drives. Unfortunately, we only have one drive in our laptop, so we're just going to be creating a pool with that single drive. If this was a RAID configuration and you had multiple drives in your FreeNAS server, you could create several pools, or you could create one giant pool with all of those drives. So there's a lot of configuration you can do here. We're going to choose create new pool. There's also an option to import an existing pool. This would be if you had another FreeNAS server, you could actually clone that over to a drive and put it on this server. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with this. We're just going to create a new pool though, then click create pool. And it's going to have us give this pool a name. And a neat thing about FreeNAS, it actually can suggest a layout. So you can see there on the left that ADA0 type SSD capacity 238.47 gigabytes. That's our SSD we installed earlier in the video. If we did a suggested layout like we're going to do in a moment, it's actually just going to move over the type of drive to the data vdevs. That's our RAID pools that we're creating. So we're just going to call this test pool, and then I'm just going to choose suggest layout, and you'll see it just moves right over from the left to the right. This is really easy because there's not a lot of guesswork involved like some RAID configurations. There's also not having to determine the 10 different types of RAIDs. FreeNAS does all this for you, which is really cool. Once we've got our data vdevs selected though, we're just going to move on to create, and it's going to confirm all the contents on the disk are going to be erased, because it is going to structure that in a software RAID. So we are sure we want to do this, but keep in mind if you had any data on those disks, they're going to get erased. So we're going to hit confirm. We're going to click create pool, and it'll take a minute. This can take a few seconds depending on really your network speed. It could take longer if you have a network with a lot of devices on it, or say you're streaming Netflix in another room, or some other folks are using it. This could take a while because this is all sending commands from your workstation we're on to that server we set up. And in my instance, it's in the next room over. But we'll give it a few more seconds here. And once this is done, things we're going to set up next is set up our software shares. So this will actually allow us to mount the server kind of as a disk on our computer. And then we're going to set up our users for that software shares. So we'll go and wait for this to finish, and then we'll carry on. All right, so it's done. We see we now have a pool named test pool. We can see it's used, a little bit of data has been used in creating it, about 1 megabyte, but we still see a healthy drive. 0%'s been actually used because the meg that's used is really just for the software RAID. We see we have 228 gigs free. Once again, if you had a lot of drives, think about you could create terabytes or hundreds of terabytes of data, depending on how big your drives are and what you create your pools with. But we're going to go ahead and move on into creating our share next. So we're going to go to sharing over on the left hand side, and we'll click on sharing. And so because we're on a Mac, we're going to set up a share specifically for macOS. Mac uses AFP, or Apple File Sharing Protocol, for Apple shares. So we'll click on that, and we're going to basically add this type of share to our data pool. So we're going to click add. And so we'll now see our data pool starts with a path. So this is kind of how we get to the share we're creating. The topmost path is always going to be /mnt for mount. But then we see test pool below that, the pool we just created. So we're going to choose test pool. You could even create a more custom path if you want to add directories below this into your test pool. So you could have directories upon directories, or a multi-folder system where it's structured. We're just going to stick with this basic one though. You could also set this up for Time Machine, being on a Mac. So Time Machine Backup is macOS's default backup system. So you could even make sure your Mac is backing up to your FreeNAS server each night or each week or periodically based off your choosing. We're not going to do this in this instance, but it is a neat option that's available for Mac users. The one thing we do need to make sure it's enabled, so we'll make sure that's checked. And we're going to click Save. And once again, this is going to send a command from our workstation to the server, so it can take a moment. And now we've created that AFP, Apple File Share Protocol test pool using the path m/test pool. It is enabled, so that's good. Next, we're actually going to create a user for this file share. So just like how we could have a single person access one share, we could create multiple users and have different users accessing different shares. So we went to Accounts and went to Users. Over on the left there, FreeNAS has a lot of users out of the box. There's about, I think, 30 some. A lot of these you won't really do anything with other than they're more for automation and they're more for FreeNAS to use. Like very rarely would you set up a user for FTP or for daemon unless you're doing some type of automation. So we're going to add a user. And so we'll put in a name and contact. So let's just add me. I'm going to type in Austin Anders as my full name. Username generates one, A. Anders there. I'm going to change that. I'm going to just make it Austin just to make it easy for me to remember. You can set up some email options so that way the user could even do password recovery if they needed to. We're going to pass on that though for right now, and we're just going to create a generic secure password. So I'm just going to type in something here, and then I'm going to confirm it. And then IDs and Groups. FreeNAS starts with user IDs of 1,000 and onwards for new users that you create. The first 0 through 999 are reserved for users on the system. So like that daemon and FTP and root. We're going to set it as a new primary group, so it actually creates a primary group for this user we're creating. So with groups, we can have file permissions not just for the user, but for the group as well. So the directories and permissions. So we're going to choose a directory. So once again, we're going to choose mount, which is our topmost directory, and then we're going to choose our test pool. So we've got our directory selected. And next, we're going to choose our permissions for the user. So read, write, and execute are all set by default for the user. Because I may want to later add more users to this new primary group, I'm going to check write for the group as well. So any users in that group could write to the file share test pool. So we've got all of that selected. Additionally, there is an option for authentication if you wanted your users to be able to use SSH to log in remotely. These are some really neat advanced tools. We're not going to cover them in this video though. I just want you to be aware that you can set this up per user, which is really nice. And we'll click Save here, and it's going to take us a moment to send that command to the server. So we'll just give it a second. And Firefox is there is detecting a password. We'll just dismiss that. So we now see that Austin user with the UID of 1,000. We see it built in is set to no, meaning we created that user. It's not a system user profile. We'll see full name over there is Austin Anders. This can also be used to search for users if you start to create a lot on your server, which is really helpful. So far, we've set up our pools under storage. We've created our directory. We've set it to support AFP, Apple File Sharing Protocol. And we've now set up a user for that pool, for our test pool. And we can even set up a window share. We're not going to do that in this video just because we're on a Mac right now. So we could set it up to if we had another user on our network that was using a Windows machine, they could also read that test pool as well. So it's really neat in that it supports multiple operating systems. So we're going to go ahead and sign out though, and we're going to test it out. So we'll just click on the power button and click log out. Be sure not to shut down the server because then you'd have to actually go physically to the server and power it back on. So let's open up Finder here. We'll drag our Finder window over here in just one second. And you can see we have a video on our desktop we're going to copy over to the FreeNAS to our test pool. That's a Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace by John Perry Barlow. Just a really interesting video. It's about 10 minutes long. It is in high definition. It's about, I think, 300 or 200 megabytes. So it's a decent sized video that we'll use as a backup example. The next thing we're going to do though is we want to mount the server to our computer. We want to be able to read the server as a disk. So you can see on locations in Finder, it's already discovered a FreeNAS server on the network. If we click on network even, we'll see that FreeNAS server shows up as well. And the reason we created a user though is we want to be able to connect to that FreeNAS server. So this is just viewing the network topography, seeing all the devices on the network. So we'll go back to FreeNAS. We're going to connect as, and we're going to use that Austin user we created just a moment ago. Keep in mind right here in macOS, my username is also named Austin. I just coincidentally created a user in FreeNAS called Austin as well. So they're going to have two different passwords. So the Austin that it's asking for is for, right now it's thinking it's my admin account. The name's the same, but it's not going to be my admin password for my Mac. So we'll type in that password I created in the FreeNAS Web Gui. And we can even have it remember this password in my keychain so it knows how to store it. We're just going to click connect, and look at that. Test pool shows up automatically. And we'll now see there's a directory for Austin that was created with my user profile. So we can store things in Austin. We can even store things, in just the test pool directory. And so all this is being read from the server. And you'll notice even on the desktop there, much like a flash drive or an external hard drive, but showing up in blue instead of orange, is a test pool. On macOS, server network drives show up as a blue icon. Local drives show up either as a gray drive, like a Macintosh up above, or a orange drive, for meaning an external but local drive, like a flash drive. So we're actually going to copy our video over to test pool. So we're just going to drag that into the Austin directory, and we'll watch that start to transfer. And so we can see, it is about 300 megabytes, and it's only taken roughly about 15 seconds to transfer for a decent size high definition video. And it's now on our server, so we can even click on it, and we can even play that back from the server over the network. So keep in mind it's not playing actually on our Mac. So we can scrub through it even just to kind of see what it looks like. So the whole video's there, it works. So really simple. It's not the version that's over there on the desktop. So this is really kind of neat as a backup mechanism. We just demonstrated this with a single video, but you could clone entire hard drives. If you have all of your work saved to multiple external hard drives or flash drives, or they're saved to other locations such as OneDrive or G Drive, and you want to kind of take control over that and you want to be in charge of it, you can put this all on your own server. So there's very limitless possibilities of what you can do with this, but it means for backing up your life's work. It's a great, safe, secure, and redundant mechanism. And as we saw, it ran on a laptop that's almost 10 years old. But if you actually took the time to buy a server or build your own for less than what it would cost to recover a server from a company like Drive Savers, you're getting a ton of savings by doing something this all on your own. So I hope you enjoyed my tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. But FreeNAS is really cool. I recommend everyone check it out.